So in this video, I'm going to go over the states and the stages of consciousness, and kind of show that there's not really multiple states of consciousness. There's only one thing happening, and you can change your orientation in relationship to what is happening. And there's kind of a sequence by which you learn to do that, like similar to a baby. You're born and you just can lay there, and the same thing is happening to you, but as you get up to, as you learn how to like push yourself up and change your orientation to like gravity, you can start to actually move around in the same thing that's happening, right? So like, let's walk through that analogy again, because that analogy is identical to the kind of like the nature of consciousness. So if you look at yourself being born, you're in a gravitational field, right? You're in that field is the only way that you can even think or conceptualize of a field is to imagine a fluid, to imagine a fluidic space, to imagine a pool of water, and then all of the water in that space is moving in a particular direction. And so everything in that water that is not the water itself experiences that push. And so that push holds you to the ground. That push, I guess, allegedly is happening between any object, but between you and the earth has a strong flow towards it. And so at first you're just in it, so you're there in it, and then as you learn, just as if you imagine you're laying down in a river, or like you're like on the top. It's like you're on the top of a big semi tractor, right? And it's driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour, and the wind's hitting you, right? Or imagine you're skydiving, and you're falling. The wind is pushing back up against you. That's kind of how that's how you experience gravity. So you notice, like, if you're laying down on the ground, and this is what people discover in floor routines, is like, lo and behold, you can, imagine you've got your hand out the window and you just do a slight shift in it, and the hand goes because of the flow of air. So the same thing's happening with gravity, and just a slight shift, and you sail that way. So as you learn to, your initial state might be face down in it, or whatever orientation the people around you put it in it, but then all of a sudden you could be face down in it, and you can push against it, and then finally like stabilize in the center of it and stand up, right? Like, I'm standing up because gravity is coming down and falling around me, pressing down evenly around me, as if I'm like in a waterfall, equally in all directions. And if I shift that so that there's more gravity flowing or hitting me in a certain way, it starts to shift the whole posture. And so walking is just this, growing from an infant in this field of gravity into it being pinned down by it, fighting it, into eventually centering oneself in it and moving around, right? So there's a skill progression. There's certain things that you could do, and you could call those states and stages of like walking. And they, you have walking, and then potentially running, and then flipping would be an increasingly like higher and higher state of gravity. And so with the states of consciousness, it's pretty much identical. It's like you're floating in consciousness, which is the same as saying that you're floating in consciousness in a manner that is identical to how your life force, your breath, your metabolism, the thing that keeps you alive, and the thing that looks out your eyeballs, like that life force, all of the energy from the air that you're breathing in, and the food that you're pulling up out of the earth, and the energy that you're drawing down out of the air, that aliveness is all in the water of the body, right? So to the same degree that you could say that all of this is arising in your consciousness, they are. When you go, how is it mechanically, physically, that all this is arising in my consciousness? I don't get it. I go, look at yourself, look at how you're arranged, look at how your breath is arranged, look at where your breath is in your body. You can look at it scientifically to intellectually understand this, and then you can know exactly where to look and what you're looking for. So you just look and you go, okay, I studied this a little bit, and it goes, okay, the energy in the air is it's electrons. It's this thing associated with atoms. We've studied that. You have a concept of it. I breathe it in. The air has this electrical charge to it. That electrical charge gets transferred to my blood. As the blood rubs past the electrical charge in the air, the blood picks up that electrical charge. So the blood is like a Van de Graaff generator. And have you ever touched a Van de Graaff generator? It's the thing at the Science Museum where you touch it and there's a belt on the inside, and the belt is touching a plastic rod, and it rubs electrons onto the rod, and it accumulates electrons into this ball. It accumulates like electrical charge onto this ball. And as the belt goes by, and so the blood is essentially the belt, right? And so you have the air, which is like the source of the electrons, the ground, and then the ball that's accumulating charge, like the Van de Graaff generator, is every single cell in the body. Every single cell in the body is a big electric ball. And so the blood is circulating, and that electricity that's charging the blood, that's coming out of the air, that is fundamentally flowing through the food, right? You take the food in and change its shape, and then the electricity flows through that food. That raw material of nature comes in and is changed into, basically biological and electrical circuitry. And so that path is happening. All the electricity from the air is accumulating into the blood, the Van de Graaff generator of the body, sort of, and then charging all of the cells, and the cells use that electricity. The DNA uses the electricity of the charged cell membrane. So there's a charged cell membrane, and then around that is kind of a DNA informational storage thing. It says what to be made. It talks with other cells, at an interdimensional genetic channel thing, right? And so, long story short, all of that is happening in the body water, right? And so that body water has, based on how it's charged, like based on the electricity in it, which is the sum total of all the chemical reactions and all of the way that the charged balls are interacting with each other. They're close enough that they carry, electromagnetic vibrations and stuff, and all that's moving. All of that is inside of a single body of water. It's like gel, but all of those electrical waves, the electrical waves flowing over the DNA, flowing over the cells, flowing through the cells, along the cells, all that electricity is in a single body of water. And then all of the patterns and stuff in that electricity in the cells is your sensory perception. It's like the nerves from your eyeballs, right? They go in and they cause neural impulses. You can put the brain chips in and get fake vision, because your vision is just a neural impulse, but it's tied into everything. The only way that you could see, even with something artificial, is if that artificial thing completed the visual circuit, because it's like, well, what are you looking at? You're looking at so you can, but people point to this all the time in terms of consciousness. They go, look at that which is ever present in your experience. Everything is arising in it. Everything is contained by it. And it's like, so when you look at that and you look, well, what am I? I'm this. And you go, okay, so what about me contains everything that's going on inside of me? And it's singular, it's invisible, it's the water. So your relationship, your orientation to your consciousness is very, very similar to something inside of or floating in water. And so you are your breath, right? You're not necessarily the water, because water would just be water. You're not water. You're not the material. You're not just the consciousness. And so that boundary point, that surface layer between the consciousness, the water, and the everything else, the energy, the matter, anything that you could ever possibly conceive of that's happening inside of consciousness or on the surface of consciousness or the movement of consciousness, like the movement of the water, that would all be breathing. And so your relationship to consciousness is that you're fundamentally floating on the surface of it. And so just being conscious and then looking up into the air, the things that are not conscious, the outside, looking into the space, which, like, if you really dig into that, all of that, the stuff that seems to be away from consciousness is actually a pattern in consciousness itself. So there's no separation, but you can see patterns in consciousness itself that imply something else. So you have like a sea of consciousness, which would be the water, and then something else would be, all the air and all the objects in the air, the other space, the other field, a field of emptiness, right? But it's not. This is a cool way to visualize this first optical illusion. It's a paradox, like a sphinx right here. So one stage of consciousness is looking into that field, looking away from consciousness, not into it, right? And then, just like a baby or just like anything else in a field or whatever, you can roll over and look into the unconsciousness, right? And so then you would have something like a sleep-wake cycle. And then being on the surface, you can actually go down into, right? You can go down deep into consciousness using things like a vortex. A vortex brings the breath very deep. You can isolate yourself into a bubble and take breath underwater in the form of a bubble. Snorkels and hoses can take the breath deep underwater, right? And what you're doing is taking or causing an invagination to go into the surface underwater, and it holds it up, right? So that pushing down into consciousness and then holding the balloon open is also identical to electrical tension, electricity. So the breath is identical. The breath is identical to pulling air underwater where it doesn't want to be. It's like pulling the positive apart from the negative. The breath is like the breathing is like the blood, the will is separating the electricity out of the air and giving it to the cells. And so people just, the breath becomes self-aware. The breath generates larger and larger waves. So you see people learning how to do things on the surface. You don't have to go very deep into the breath to be totally supported by the breath. And in fact, I found if you want to go deeper and deeper and deeper into these activities or into truth or like into this mastery level, it's unavoidably, like its very nature is discomfort. The very nature of it is discomfort. So to go deep, like when somebody's experiencing suffering or somebody's experiencing discomfort, simultaneously that is going deep. And the only thing that I can't. What's the only thing that pushes people there is like seeing that going deep helps other people. Like love pushes you there. Scary things push people there. But taking the surface and going deeper and deeper and deeper is more and more, it just feels like dying, right? So that feeling of drowning, emptiness, crushed, dying is like depth of being. It's because normally the breath is only on the surface, like we're surface creatures in comparison to the depth of the God on which we like dance, right? So like to have any real depth, to go into consciousness that way is either like you're cutting yourself off from everything and everyone, or pulling, like being down there is against your nature. Like as the breath, as a surface creature, as a created thing, it's against the nature to go into the infinite of God, to try and take the self and swim down. So as you do that, it pulls it under tension, and it's harder and harder and harder. And the type of difficulty that is to really go deep is suffering. And it's the physics of it is just like if you have a bubble, it wants to go up. If you push a wave down, it wants to get pulled back up. So it's pushing against what wants to happen. So to go deep into it that way, it's pushing heavily against what wants to happen. Which, if the goal is to go like infinitely deep or whatever, the only thing that could ever possibly happen is you break away and get cut off from everything and everyone, or fail and collapse and get thrown up, snap back even higher into emptiness than anybody could ever imagine. From this like rubber band effect, and it's not even anything like personal. It's like very personal, but it's also just the physics of the thing. So the different states is like just looking into that and being like, oh, that's there, no, that's there. And if you think too much or you do like stuff weird, you can become blind in particular ways or desensitized. So it's like, oh, you can't see very far in certain things, or like you might not be remembering dreaming or waking, or just it can get confusing. But nobody ever changes their consciousness or changes the depth of the consciousness. It's like infinitely down and infinitely out in every direction. And like sideways feels pretty good, and going deep like hurts pretty bad. But it's like the depth. Going deep is when you realize like the depth of your own true nature and your own body. Because otherwise you're just at the surface and you can't even fathom what it is that's like what you're on or what you are, or the bigness of it. But it does. There's like a that theological drive. The reason that people get this theological drive or this any sort of seeking truth or anything like that is just from being on the TV screen of consciousness. It's like, like even though that's a whole world, you know that it's not the world. And so then there becomes this maniacal like looking for the actual world. And then everyone goes, oh, but it is what it is. So there's not any like stages or states or anything like that of consciousness. There are big astrological wave patterns that make people like behave in particular ways and push things in certain directions, and they go back and forth in all 8 directions and all that. But so there's like, yeah, I would say that's it, right? So it's like, what's going on when somebody says like, oh, there's high vibe and low vibe consciousness and all this other stuff, is it's different plane, like anybody that's talking about like different planes of existence and whatever is talking about something in that on the screen of consciousness, and not the that analogy I think is about as close as you're ever going to get in terms of like it being pointed out very, very directly. There's like a you can imagine being the surface of water and capable of looking at yourself, right? And capable of like looking at another part of yourself and not and seeing more than what's there, right? When you look at a TV or you're looking at this screen, It's only the cell phone there. You're seeing me. So that can happen at a very, very, very deep level, and that the technology is reflecting what's happening at a very, very deep level. And it's not even necessarily bad to be seeing these resonant patterns in the fabric of consciousness and tie them together so we can talk on our cell phone. But you don't want to forget what's actually going on, or come up with a yeah, I mean, it's fine. Like, it's fine, right? It's fine. Like, even like no matter what you do, it'd be okay, probably.